Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying today's event so far. My name is Dan Rossiter, and I am one of the sector leads for the built environment here at the British Standards Institution. Today, I'm quite excited because I get to talk to you about something that we've been working on for quite a while here at BSI, a service called BSI Identify, which is hoping to help support product traceability and the golden thread. So what I'll do is I will talk a bit about context and then talk a bit about our upcoming service shortly as part of this presentation. Just as a reminder, there are going to be questions or the opportunity to ask questions as there has been throughout the event. So feel free to drop any questions in as we go, and we will make sure we have time at the end of the session to address each of them. Before we begin, I just want you to sit there and look at the space you're sitting in. I want you to consider where you are. You are probably in some form of home office. It might not quite look like my mock-up here, but you might have something similar, or you might be lucky enough to be in an office at the moment. And looking at the space, how many of the products that make your office can you identify? Your computer, sure, it probably has a logo for the manufacturer on it and might even have make and model information actually written on it. The furniture, if it's anything like my room, it's full of IKEA furniture, fairly easy to identify. But what about the plasterboard behind your wall? What about the door, the windows, the skirtings, the elements that make up the ceiling or that constitute the floor? That's not so easy. And it's very difficult, particularly if you've gone into a space and you don't have that information readily available, to be able to make decisions about it. So the first thing is probably to try and work out where might you find that information. And truth be told, you should be able to find that in a number of places. The easiest one first is probably look for the product label. There should be something maybe on the product that tells you what it is, but that's not always the case. You might have documentation like a CE marking, a smart CE marking, and those sorts of things that might give you some information about the product, in which case, excellent. There might be declarations of conformity, third-party certifications, other bits of documentation that might give you some information to help you identify it. And if you're in a kind of non-residential building, you may have access to something like a building manual, which, if it follows the British Standard BS 8587, should include key design information and relevant handover information. Or if you're looking at something like the health and safety file, and if it follows some of the recommendations in CDM 2015, should include information about things that constitute the building, as well as things like drawings and other bits and pieces as well. And having access to a source of information is great, but what is difficult is to ensure that that information is also correct. And the reason I say this is because it's quite difficult to be able to establish where some of that information has come from. Consider one product. I've put a bit of paint up there, but it can be any product that you can think of. The idea would be that the manufacturer will create some base information about it and give that product an identifier. What will then happen is that other providers, such as distributors, aggregators, and suppliers, will also create their own identifiers for that same product within their respective systems. That information is then cascaded into various forms that that information can take. The idea being that they may produce things like product data templates, they may create library objects for CAD use, they may come in databases and various different bits of documentation. However, only the bits that you can see in black are controlled and managed by the original manufacturer, which means that if there's an issue with the product, if some of the information needs to be changed in order to keep it up to date, you can only trust that kind of core information, because there's no guarantee that it's been fed into the distributors or the suppliers who have then updated their documentation as well. Which means that while information is readily available, there's no guarantee that it is necessarily accurate or up to date. So when you are one of these actors in the built environment, be it an owner, a consultant, contractor, or someone trying to maintain the building, whether that information is correct and up to date is actually a pretty big question, and one that is quite difficult to answer. And so from that, we begin kind of a tortuous journey around the information that are around products. This idea that there is a whole host of literature that's available from manufacturers, distributors, and suppliers, but they may vary because of the fact that if information has been updated or products have been withdrawn, there may be conflicting information out within the built environment. As such, when a specifier tries to use that information, they're not necessarily using what is the up-to-date information, which means that when they place it into their design specifications, they could be writing specific products in that no longer exist or are kind of previous iterations of what is now a current product, or even products that have been withdrawn from the market, or might be basing their performance specifications based on something that isn't current, making the use of things like equal or approved, difficult as part of this process. This means then that when the contractor comes to site and is first trying to procure the product, it might not be possible to get it because it doesn't exist, it isn't correct, it doesn't meet the performance specification even though it's been referenced, or the product itself is no longer available. In which case they need to look to find equivalents or undertake a value engineering exercise to try to establish what is a equivalent product that could be placed in there. And if the right information hasn't been used, that could lead to the incorrect product being placed, issues with installation, which could ultimately lead to performance gap issues and other problems in addition to the traceability of these products. This then further perpetuates as when we get to handover and the asset management team have to try and use this information. What they'll now have is information as part of the health and safety file and the handover that might conflict with the design specification, meaning that they might have missing information as well as information that is conflicting, making it quite difficult to know actually what is the product that was put there to begin with. And while for some products, they may have make and model written on them, this isn't true for all products, in which case it actually gets quite difficult to verify what was put there against the product itself because it isn't self-descriptive and doesn't include its own make and model necessarily on the product itself. So there's clearly a problem here, and we've seen from a number of the talks earlier related to similar issues. For example, Rebecca in the keynote talked a fair bit about this lack of information, which has helped inform some progressions in industry as the way we move forward. One example of this has been some of the recommendations within Building a Safer Future, also known as the Hackett Report. As part of this, a key recommendation, recommendation 7.5, talked about a need for a consistent labeling and traceability system to be able to resolve these sorts of issues. As part of it, it focused on the fact that there isn't this up-to-date or an easy system to ensure up-to-date manufacturers' information about their products and the confusion that can be put in as part of this. And this has been so enshrined in that now a part of this, it's moved on to empowering some of the provisions in the Building Safety Bill, specifically around Schedule 8, looking at construction product regulations. So not only is it featured in the report, but it's now starting to be baked into some of the key regulations that will be coming through into the built environment. Now, this is a problem that's been plaguing the industry for a while, and it isn't something new. By that, what I mean is that there have been considerable different ways of looking at it, and even we as BSI have been researching this for quite a while. Within Building a Safer Future, it also talks about a innovation project that started to look at the usefulness of an identification system that could achieve what I'm talking about. And that was some early research that we did with partners such as the Construction Product Association to look at this. And one of the key things we did with the research is look at the usefulness of a persistent identification code for construction products. And the idea of looking at would there be benefits of doing so? And some of the benefits that came out of the research talked about things like being able to verify handover information, the ability to have a digital record for each product, as well as being able to make information about products readily available to various stakeholders within the built environment. This research we originally started in 2015, and it's helped us develop our offering, what we're thinking about, into what we have called BSI Identify. And the idea is that BSI Identify is a service which will provide an unambiguous link between a product and its supporting information. And the idea is that this will help with a consistent approach to the way that we manage this information and to ensure it has long-term persistence. And by persistence, I mean that it will exist beyond the lifetime of the manufacturer through the process and the technologies we are utilizing. Core to this is a key thing that we are giving people as part of this process, which is a universal persistent identification number. The idea is that this number, which I will call UPIN for the rest of this presentation, is assigned to products by BSI Identify. As part of that process, then it is given to them so that it can be linked to the products themselves. This data is publicly accessible and will persist in the long term because it's being managed as part of the service. It means whether that manufacturer goes out of business, is bought up, whether there's a rebranding, change of information, that it will persist on the system, meaning that access to that information will always be readily available. And the idea is that as part of this, there are a number of things that you won't be able to do. So we are not looking at creating a product catalog, and there won't be buttons on it to be able to buy products. This isn't a catalog system that we're putting in place. It doesn't offer side-by-side product comparisons, and we are not storing intense levels of product information to produce things like product data templates and other things like that. The idea is those sorts of things are linked or connected into the system as opposed to being produced here. Which means that services such as the RRBA product selector, eTIM, and other things, aren't. This isn't a competitor to those systems. It's simply a way of having a universal, unique, unambiguous, persistent identifier for products to enable access to information throughout the life cycle it is used within. And it's based on the idea of a digital object identifier. The technology itself is specified within an international standard, ISO 26324, and the idea is that there is a system of relevant authorities who manage these identifiers so that they will persist into the long term. And as part of it, they're able to do several things. The fact that they're curated means that they could be protected and ensure that they persevere. There's an ability to support basic relationships. So as part of this, it can identify whether a product is an assembly, whether it is part of an assembly, or whether it has been replaced or superseded by another product by that manufacturer. Meaning that it can help with long-term questions from asset management in terms of needing to repair or replace a product that is no longer in circulation, for example. The idea is that it's a clever identifier that acts both as a unique ID as well as a web address. So by typing in the PUIN into something like a browser, it means that you're able to land on a landing page that provides basic information about the product, things like name, make, model, classification, any compliance information relating to that product itself. So a simple set of information that will be made available to help identify it, as well as the ability to link resources to it as part of that. So for example, if a manufacturer wanted to add links to its own website, to test information, to product data templates, to information in other systems, library objects for use in CAD and BIM, the ability is to be able to stick those as links as part of this landing page setup. The system itself is a proven technology used in a number of sectors, including academia as well as in the publication industry. And it's something that we as BSI believe in so strongly that we use it for our own portfolio. The link I put on the screen there is a digital object identifier to the international standard for industry foundation classes, or IFC. So by using that link, you see it renders itself as a hyperlink, and by going to doi.org/ with everything else on it there, you're able to go to a landing page on that standard itself. So it's a technology that we have experience in using to manage our portfolio of above 60,000 standards that we operate and curate, and think that there's good applications for it in the world of construction products. Now, I mentioned this journey and the way that it's fraught with some of the difficulties in the way that information is managed as it passes through the system. What we now have is that BSI Identify can support in a number of ways. The first is that when manufacturers receive the UPINs that they assign to their products, as mentioned, they can then place information which they control on the landing page. So they're able to add things like any relevant conformance declarations, any additional links like product data templates and such, so it performs as a single source of truth. They can then provide that information to distributors, to suppliers, or through their own resources and literature, so that there is an unambiguous set of up-to-date information readily available about that product. As a simple, unique identifier, it can be placed within design specifications. So while either doing performance specs by citing equal or approved and then linking to the product, or by using it when specifically mentioning products to be used as part of a specification, it provides that simple, unique identifier which shows through absolute clarity what product is being discussed. This means that it's easier then for the contractor to be able to cite that product, to be able to try and acquire it as part of this process, and can even help with tracking the product itself. For example, the UPIN can be placed on packaging, which means that it could be checked as it's leaving the factory, as well as checked as it arrives on site, ensuring that the products that were ordered are the products which are received, and also helps with another layer of helping to battle with fraudulent materials. The idea then being that when producing handover information, it can be the UPIN again could be used here, so that asset management or anyone involved in the use, repair or maintenance of those assets can then use the UPIN to identify what the product is, as well as instantly be able to find relevant resources about the product, to be able to find out more information, whether the product is still current, as well as get the basic information they need in order to perform their actions. And finally, it's able to be displayed or placed on products or embedded within them in a number of different ways. So the idea is that this UPIN can be captured in several different methods. The first is the kind of normal method, which is then you can see effectively that URL-based method, where it could be placed on labels, it could be set within documentation, or could be used in a number of different places to do so. At the same time, it could be set into things like QR codes, or placed within RFID chips or NFC tags, meaning that the information itself could be hidden within products, as well as either etched or written onto them. This means that when you start looking at very different products, there are different implementations that could be used depending on the product itself. Now, at the start of this presentation, I asked you to think about the room you're in and the various bits and pieces that constitute that space. And the difficulty is going to be identifying some of these things. Now, through something like BSI Identify, that information could become readily available. QR codes could be placed on furniture items. Things like NFC and RFIDs can be embedded within surfaces. And even the UPIN could be referenced more closely within handover information to ensure that all the relevant information is gathered, collected, and more importantly, is readily accessible when needed. The idea being that you could be having a discussion about how you want to improve or refurbish a space, and while having the conversation with people in the space, you should be able to then actually use this technology to pull up information about various products to help inform decision making, which I think alone is quite a powerful tool. So this is some of the stuff that we're looking at in regards to product information. I can imagine a fair few of you on the call are interested in product information generally. So before I conclude, I want to let you know about some other things that are going on that may be of interest for you. This is a number of things that are being done and supported by the Construction Products Association. The first being that the Construction Products Association have launched an industry-wide consultation into the new Code for Construction Product Information, CCPI. The idea is they want to gather views on the code before it's formally launched later in the year. It's made up of 11 clauses that aim to set benchmarks on how product information is presented and marketed by manufacturers. The consultation is live, so if you go to www.buildingsafely.co.uk, You should be able to have access to some of that information to be able to present some of your views. So if you're interested, I encourage you to go have a look and present your views and on the actual thing prior to it being launched. In addition, there's a number of work that's being done by the Construction Product Association around a lexicon, which has been supported by the Construction Innovation Hub, who are delivering it. The idea is that lexicon is a software platform to help with the way that we set common approaches when creating and managing critically important product data. Currently, the group are looking at common terms of references, and eventually the idea then of how those will then be developed into the common terms for data dictionaries, which will then in turn be used to create product data templates for consistency throughout the industry. So there's a lot of interesting work happening there. And thankfully as well, CPA were kind enough to say some nice words about BSI Identify, where, as I mentioned earlier, they have been a participant in the work that we've been doing and a partner in the original research, and are delighted to be involved in it so that we are able to help control the maintenance and dissemination of up-to-date product information. So there's some fairly exciting things going on relating to construction product information throughout the built environment. So, in summary, products either don't have any form of identifier or more often have too many identifiers. There's an inconsistency and an ambiguity that's caused by the raft of identifiers that are available. Something like BSI Identify allows for consistency by providing a single unambiguous identifier that can be used to point to a single up-to-date set of product information. Otherwise, the idea of trying to keep this product information up to date is a challenge. For manufacturers who have to manage this distributed network that we have as a built environment supply chain, once that information has been released and given to distributors, suppliers, and others, it can be quite difficult to ensure that the right information is being disseminated within this network. By being able to control a landing page about your product where you curate your own information, you're able to keep this up to date and simply ask people to refer to this single source of truth so that they have the right information available at the right time about these products. The idea that these having it as a digital solution helps bring efficiencies and will improve compliances. Through the advent of things like building information modeling, the industry itself, it's digitally transforming, and we are using more and more digital tools trying to achieve efficiencies. By having a unique identifier, which also provides access to up-to-date product information, will help ensure that those products meet the requirements of specifications, that they have the right compliance information set against them, and that there's better transparency about the products and the information relating to them. And what might be the ultimate reason is that government desire some form of persistent identification code, having seen several of the issues in the industry and wanted them to be resolved as part of the way that they're working. So, but the fact that it's been referenced in Building for a Safer Future and in the draft Building Safety Bill shows how critically important having a solution like this is to the UK government. And hopefully, BSI Identify can be that solution. It's due to launch in Q2, as I mentioned earlier, and we're currently looking for people who are willing to be early adopters. If you think that the product looks, or service even looks interesting, please contact a colleague of mine, Will Johnson Marshall, for more information using the email provided on the slide. And hopefully it'll help enable better traceability for products and the dissemination of good product information. Thank you. Right, hopefully there have been a stream of questions coming through. So I can see a number of them come through already. Thank you, Will, for helping me with this. So the first question I can see is, will the UPIN form part of the data templates? And the idea is that it could form part of a data template. It can work both ways as part of this. So the first is that depending on what are the properties that have been agreed for as part of that product data template, if one of them is a unique identifier or a URL or something similar, then of course the UPIN could be placed within that field to enable that information to be captured. Likewise, the product data template itself could be linked to on the landing page that which the UPIN points to as part of this process. So it can work both ways as part of that. And there are some initial examples that we did as part of the early research where the UPINs were being placed within COBE, for example. So there's early precedents that show how this information can be embedded into this literature. There's a question here about whether UPINs are going to be part of legislation. At the moment, much with a lot of the stuff that we do at British Standards Institution, that the UPIN itself is voluntary. However, we are trying to ensure that as part of it, it is a value adding service, so that what it does is it gives manufacturers and those who use it several benefits to the way that they work. And we're working with several partners to look at the way that it will improve that through user stories and scenarios to make sure that this isn't an added extra bit of complexity, but actually something useful that will benefit those stakeholders. So hopefully it'll be worthy of adoption by itself, but we are also hoping that it will help resolve some of the questions and provisions being set out in legislation in that way. A question coming through is the difference between UPIN and uniclass. So the idea is that the UPIN itself doesn't classify the product. It is a unique reference for that product. So what may happen is that a manufacturer might have several products of the same type. So if I'll make up an example for now. If there was a door manufacturer with various different types of doors, each door may get its own UPIN as part of this, but when you look at something like uniclass, they might each have the same uniclass classification, so they are performing different functions. However, as part of some of the basic information we're planning to have on the landing page, being able to record the uniclass classification is part of that. So by providing someone with the UPIN, they should be able to have access to the uniclass classification if this is something that the manufacturer has chosen to include on the landing page. So I see lots more questions coming through, which is excellent. So there's a question here about the use of the CE mark to achieve some of this. And as part of it, there's some of this information, yes, can be found using the CE mark. But what we're doing as part of this is, one, that it is self-descriptive in the sense that the unique ID will take you to the information, which means it can be updated. So in a sort of traditional CE mark sense, that information may not have been updated. In a smart CE sense, yes. However, this also gives the opportunity for the manufacturer to be able to point to other literature and other sources of information from that page as well as being able to collect information about the CE mark on the landing page. So they're able to work in a complementary fashion. And in a similar way, we had the question about the way the UPINs differ from barcodes, and in a similar way that, through the use of barcodes and other identification systems, you might be able to get some of that basic product information. But one of the things that we're able to do here is have those extra bits of literature, things like being able to signpost to product data templates or test reports or certificates of compliance, declarations of performance, and other bits of literature, all brought together onto a single landing page that also provides a unique identification for that product itself. So there are a number of different ways that it can work in a different way, but also complementary too. As part of this, so there's been a question about the use of UPIN for all products, considering there could be an infinite number of products. What we're doing is that we are recording a UPIN for each product type as not each individual product. So for example, if you are a manufacturer of PVC piping, each PVC piping type, configuration, profile or size might get a UPIN, but each individual pipe won't. So as part of that, there's the ability to resolve enough IDs as part of this, and the underlying system can capture what I understand is about 250 million IDs as part of it. So it's able to take an awful lot of identifiers that can be resolved a fair number of times as part of this process. I'm conscious of time, so as part of this, I will move on to a final question. As part of this, so there's a couple that came through. Will the UPin become part of objects within various object library systems? And the idea is that potentially, yes. We're at the early stages of the product and the product launch now, but if any of you watching are owners of product libraries and want to include that sort of information, such as the UPins for products in those systems, that's certainly possible, as well as if you're a manufacturer and you have hosted your information on a product library system, what you're able to do is actually link the link to that specific product onto the landing page for that UPin. So what you're able to do is create that bi-directional process, but it's up to you as the manufacturer, because ultimately you have control over the information you want to show on those landing pages and what you want to have resolved. I'm afraid that's taken me up to my half hour and the time that I have got. So thank you all very much for listening. I hope I've answered the majority of your questions. I'll move back one slide just to put Will's email back on the screen. So if you don't feel that I've answered your question or answered it sufficiently, or if you'd like to find out more, please contact Will or use the system within the SwapCard app, where you're able to request meetings or ask for more information, and we will get back to you and your queries as soon as reasonably possible. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.